No one called it the Black Death at first. That name came later, after there was distance, after there were survivors left to name what had happened. At the time, it was just death. Everywhere. All at once. And if you were living in London in the late 1340s, you didn't wonder if it would reach you. You wondered when. This is what it was like to live in London while the world was quietly ending. London in the 14th century was not the city people imagine today. It was smaller, tighter, darker, and louder. Narrow streets twisted between wooden buildings that leaned so close together they almost touched. Upper floors hung over the road, blocking sunlight and trapping smells. The city never really slept. Carts rattled over stone. Animals screamed. People shouted. Bells rang constantly, not to mark time, but to announce death. There was no sanitation system. Human waste was dumped into the streets or directly into the Thames. Butchers discarded remains wherever they could. Rats were everywhere, though no one paid them much attention. Rats were normal. Fleas were invisible, and invisibility made them dangerous. Most Londoners lived their entire lives within a few streets. You were born there. You worked there. You died there. Travel was rare. News traveled slowly. So when rumors began arriving from the continent, entire towns dying, ships drifting into ports with no living crew, many people didn't believe them. People always think disaster will be reasonable, that it will arrive politely, with warnings, with time to prepare. It never does. The first ships arrived carrying wool, spices, and something else, something unseen. Sailors were already sick when they docked. Some died before unloading cargo. Others collapsed in taverns. Within days, dock workers were falling ill, then their families, then their neighbors. At first, the symptoms were confusing. A fever, then exhaustion, then pain so sharp it felt like the body was tearing itself apart from the inside. And then the swellings appeared. Painful lumps in the groin, under the arms, along the neck. Buboes. They turned dark, then black. Some burst, some didn't. Either way, death usually followed within days. Londoners had never seen anything like this. Doctors were useless, not because they didn't care, but because they had no tools that worked. Medicine was based on humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Disease was imbalance. The solution was bleeding, purging, prayer. None of it mattered. If you were rich, you fled the city. If you were poor, you stayed and waited. And most people were poor. Daily life began to change in small, terrifying ways. Markets opened later, then not at all. Bread became scarce. Workers stopped showing up. Entire households went silent. Doors stayed closed. Windows were boarded. Marks appeared on homes. Warnings, prayers, desperate symbols meant to keep death out. They didn't work. The soundscape of London shifted. The constant noise softened. Less shouting, fewer carts, fewer animals. But the bells never stopped. Church bells rang for the dead so often they blurred into a single, endless sound. Eventually, they stopped ringing entirely, not out of mercy, but because there were too many bodies to announce. If someone in your house fell sick, everyone knew what that meant. You didn't rush to help. You didn't touch them. Love became dangerous. Compassion became lethal. Parents avoided their children. Spouses slept apart. People learned to look away, because touching could kill you. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Churchyards overflowed. Mass graves were dug outside the city walls. Cart after cart rolled through the streets at night, collecting the dead. Sometimes the people weren't dead yet. Sometimes they begged. Sometimes no one checked. Grief lost its shape. You didn't mourn one person. You mourned constantly, until mourning itself became exhausting. Eventually, people stopped crying. Not because they didn't care, but because caring required energy they no longer had. Religion intensified. Processions filled the streets. People whipped themselves, believing the plague was punishment for sin. Others drank heavily, convinced the world was ending and restraint no longer mattered. Crime rose, then collapsed. There was nothing left to steal. Children grew up surrounded by corpses. They watched neighbors vanish. They learned early that survival was random, that goodness meant nothing, that prayer was unreliable. And still, every morning people woke up, not because they were hopeful, but because sleep ended and life, for whatever reason, continued. Doctors wore strange beaked masks stuffed with herbs, believing good smells could block disease. They looked like creatures from nightmares. Seeing one approach, your house meant you were already dead. Most people refused to let them in. The plague didn't discriminate, but it did devastate unevenly. The poor died in greater numbers. Entire professions vanished. Apprentices outlived masters. Children inherited businesses they didn't understand. Social order cracked, and beneath all of it was fear. Not loud fear, quiet fear. The kind that sits in your chest when you wake up and wonder if today is the day your body betrays you. The kind that makes every itch suspicious, every cough fatal, every headache a sentence. No one knew how it spread. No one knew how to stop it, and no one knew when it would end. Only that it hadn't ended yet. You woke up not because you felt rested, but because the city was quiet in a way it never had been before. In London, silence was wrong. Silence meant something had happened, something irreversible. You lay still for a moment, listening, counting sounds the way people once counted sheep. A cart, a voice, a bell, anything? Some mornings there was nothing at all, and that was worse. If you shared a room with family, the first thing you did was look at their chests. Breathing meant survival, at least for now. You learned to check without touching. Touching was a habit you had to break. Instinct told you to reach out, but instinct had become unreliable. Love had become dangerous. You dressed slowly. Clothes were rarely washed anymore. Water was precious, and cleanliness felt pointless when death ignored it anyway. People wore the same garments for weeks, stiff with sweat and fear. The smell of the city had changed. It wasn't just waste and animals anymore. It was sickness, sweet, rotting, metallic. Once you noticed it, you couldn't stop smelling it. Going outside meant risk, but staying inside meant waiting. Many people chose movement. It felt like control. The streets were thinner now, faces familiar, because there were fewer of them. You began to recognize who was still alive by absence. That door hadn't opened in days. That window stayed dark. That family hadn't been seen since last week. You didn't knock. Markets, when they functioned, were tense and quiet. Food was laid out quickly, sold quickly. No bargaining, no lingering. Coins were exchanged at arm's length. Everyone watched everyone else for signs. A cough, a stumble, a flushed face. You learned to read bodies the way sailors read weather. Work, if you still had it, felt unreal. Some trades vanished overnight. Tailors, scribes, craftsmen. Their clients were dead or gone. Others became essential. Grave diggers, cart drivers, priests, and even they began to disappear. There were days when bodies waited because no one was left to move them. Inside homes, families fractured. Not loudly, quietly. Someone would stop eating. Someone would refuse to leave bed. Someone would begin scratching or complain of pain. The moment symptoms appeared, the room changed. People backed away without discussing it. They didn't need to. Everyone knew the sequence. Fever first, pain next, then the swellings. You might survive a day after the buboes appeared, maybe 2, rarely 3. The speed was part of the terror. There was no time to prepare, no time to make peace. Death arrived mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-life. Children learned to be silent. Crying drew attention. Attention drew risk. Some children were sent away from sick parents. Others were left alone when parents fled, or died, or both. Orphaned children wandered streets that no longer cared about rules. Churches stayed open longer than anything else. People packed inside, desperate for meaning, for explanation, for forgiveness. Some believed the plague was divine punishment. Others believed it was poisoned air, bad stars, evil winds. No theory changed the outcome. At night, fear intensified. Darkness hid symptoms. People imagined pain where there was none. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams were filled with bells and swelling flesh and faceless figures. You woke often to check yourself, your neck, your armpits, your groin. You pressed gently, praying not to feel anything new. If you did feel something, you said nothing at first. Denial bought hours, sometimes days, and days mattered. The carts returned at night. They always came at night. Men shouted warnings before entering streets, their voices hoarse. "Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!" Some people complied immediately. Others waited until the cart was closer, hoping maybe the person wasn't dead yet. Sometimes they weren't. The city stopped pretending there was dignity left. Bodies were stacked, burials rushed, prayers shortened, names forgotten. Death became administrative, a task, a number. People stopped asking why. They started asking who was next. And the most terrifying realization came quietly, without drama. You noticed it one day while standing in the street, watching another cart roll past. You were still alive. Not because you were better, not because you were cleaner, not because you were more faithful, just because. Survival began to feel arbitrary, random, unjust, and that changed people. Some became reckless, others became cruel, a few became numb. Morality, like everything else, thinned, and yet, somehow, life continued. Someone still baked bread. Someone still swept a doorstep. Someone still laughed once, then immediately looked ashamed for doing it. Moments of normality felt stolen, dangerous, almost disrespectful. But they happened anyway, because even in a dying city, people kept living until they couldn't. "I'll stop here." By the time people realized London was emptying, it was already too late to count who was gone. The city didn't collapse all at once. It hollowed out. Streets that once took minutes to cross could now be walked for long stretches without seeing another person. Shops stayed shuttered, not because of fear anymore, but because there was no one left to open them. Entire neighborhoods went quiet, not temporarily, but permanently. Those who could flee had already done so. The wealthy escaped first, retreating to countryside estates, leaving servants behind with instructions that stopped mattering almost immediately. Then merchants followed. Then anyone with family outside the city. What remained was a core of people with nowhere to go, nothing to sell, and no illusion that distance would save them. For those still alive, survival became routine rather than hope. You stopped asking if tomorrow would be better. You asked only if you would wake up, Each day was borrowed time, and everyone knew it. Time itself began to feel warped. Days blurred together. Weeks vanished. You could no longer remember when someone had died, only that they were gone. The Thames flowed as it always had, but fewer boats moved along it. Trade slowed, then stopped. Cargo rotted on docks. Animals wandered unattended. Dogs and pigs roamed streets freely, feeding on refuse, and sometimes on things people pretended not to see. The smell of death became background. At first it was overwhelming. Later it was just part of the air. People stopped reacting to it the way you stop reacting to constant noise. The human body adapts, even to horror. When the plague finally began to slow, no one celebrated. There was no clear moment when it ended, no announcement, no bell ringing for survival. Just fewer carts, fewer new graves. A day when you realized you hadn't heard someone coughing nearby. Then another day. Then a week. And still, people waited. Because everyone had learned the same lesson. Relief could be temporary. Eventually, something close to normality tried to return. Markets reopened cautiously. Work resumed where it could. Survivors stepped back into routines that felt unfamiliar, like clothes borrowed from someone else's life. But London was not the same city. Half the population was gone. Entire family lines had ended. Businesses had no heirs. Churches had empty pews. Skilled labor was scarce. Children inherited roles meant for adults. Power structures shifted quietly as the dead made room for the living. Survivors carried invisible scars. People startled easily. Touch remained difficult. Coughs caused heads to turn. A single fever could empty a street again. Trust took years to rebuild, and for some it never did. People spoke differently, more carefully, or not at all. There was less patience for ceremony, less tolerance for delay. Death had removed urgency from trivial things and added weight to moments that used to pass unnoticed. Some people became deeply religious. Others lost faith entirely. Many never spoke of the plague again. Silence became a coping mechanism. If you didn't name it, maybe it couldn't return. But memory lingered. Every mass grave outside the city walls, every abandoned home, every child who grew up without knowing why their parents were gone. The Black Death didn't just kill bodies. It rewired how people understood the world. Before the plague, life was hard, but predictable. After it, people understood that systems could fail overnight. That authority could be helpless. That survival had little to do with virtue. That death did not negotiate. Living through the Black Death meant learning that the world could end quietly, without fire or collapse, just absence. And if you survived London during those years, you carried that knowledge forever. You learned that life was fragile, that safety was temporary, that tomorrow was never promised, and every ordinary day that followed felt strange, not because it was bad, but because it existed at all.